Is day 11 of the Israeli and American bombing of Iran, and the US Secretary of Defense says it is to be the most intense day of strikes yet. Pete Hegseth making those comments during a briefing at the Pentagon this Tuesday alongside the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Dan Kane, who said more than 5,000 targets in Iran have now been hit. Now, in response, Iran is continuing to fire missiles at Israel and at the Gulf states of Bahrain, the UAE and Qatar, although Hegseth claimed the number of Iranian attacks is now tailing off.
Today will be, yet again, our most intense day of strikes inside Iran. The most fighters, the most bombers, the most strikes. Intelligence more refined and better than ever. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, the last 24 hours have seen Iran fire the lowest number of missiles they've been capable of firing yet.
With me now to talk a bit about Pete Hegseth's comments is Douglas Herbert, our foreign affairs commentator. And Doug, look, did we get any clearer sense from Pete Hegseth there as to when all of this might come to an end?
No, and the reason being, Nadia, is because he cannot be any clearer or perhaps unclear than his boss, Donald Trump. Donald Trump, how many times have we heard in the past few days that Donald Trump has sent, I think the euphemism is contradictory signals about how long this war could last, right? Mixed messages, in quotes. We say it all the time. I've said it at least 10 times, and it's the 11th day of this war already. The reason it draws a little bit of a chuckle. Why? Because it's not just contradictory signals. The message, if any, is that there is no message. The messaging from Donald Trump so far has been, if he says it emphatically enough and often enough, perhaps he could will what he says into actually happening. And this is not just applying to Iran, but other conflicts as well. You say we're going to hit them hard, you throw out the threats, you throw everything in the kitchen sink at them, and you hope it's going to have some impact, the rhetoric and the strikes as well. But the reality is, it's not that it's falling on deaf ears. People hear what Donald Trump's saying, but they are also factoring in something else, and that is the defiance from the Iranian side and this sense, a nagging sense, that as much as Trump might be self-convinced, bombastic in his rhetoric, he may have miscalculated. And not only may, but in the view of many listening to him, he did miscalculate. And we're already in these very early days of war seeing signs that perhaps the lay over and play dead response that this administration had perhaps, as well as Israel, been counting on in the very opening salvos and shots of this war has not come to pass. And yes, while we hear the generals in the U.S. day after day saying that the intensity perhaps of the strikes is decelerating from Iran, that they're going to have less weaponry, so far we're not really seeing that it has affected Iran's ability, at least strategically, and more than just a little symbolically, to continue striking across the region. We have seen the strikes in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, in the UAE, so on and so forth. They might not be as intense as the opening days, but they're still happening, and the uncertainty is still just as much there. Pete Hegseth today had the same bombastic and chest-thumping, and let's just say a jingoistic, patriotic American tone as he did at his last press conferences. The only difference perhaps is he was perhaps a notch less gung-ho because they don't know the timeline, and he offered a prayer at the end.
And look, on Iran and Iran's response to all of this, Tehran has been very clear. It says oil is not going to go through the Straits of Hormuz in these tankers. Key, of course, to the global supply of oil. Should we take the Iranian leadership seriously when they say that?
Well, there's certainly their message is very serious and very direct and unflinching. We heard Iran's parliament speaker basically dismissing any suggestion whatsoever that Iran might be seeking right now a ceasefire, because Donald Trump has sort of alluded to, or perhaps wanted people to believe, that it's just a matter of minutes, if not hours or whatever, that Iran's going to acquiesce, surrender, that they're all but down and out, that this war is going to be over in a flash. But Iran's not showing signs of that. In fact, the defiance defiance. If anything, they're hunkering down, even as perhaps they run lower on their ammunition. We heard Ali Larijani, who is by now the de facto leader of Iran. He's the highest national security official, basically saying in response to Trump's comments yesterday, Iran doesn't fear your empty threats. You could say, okay, he's posturing. He would say that, right? After all, he's the Iranian top security official. But there's a sense that Iran knows that while it can't match the U.S. and Israel, far from it militarily, it knows it's outnumbered, overpowered. It knows that symbolically and its spirit of resilience, it can more than match it, and it's playing the clock. It is banking on the fact that it can keep that Gulf of the Hormuz closed, or at least people uncertain enough about it for a while.
And let's talk then about how Donald Trump is handling this at home. We know that the American public doesn't really want this war.
They do not. And it's not me saying it. It's actually Gallup, which is perhaps the most respected poll in the United States, showed that in the opening days, in the earliest days of this war, the approval for this war from Americans, their approval of this war is lower than any war in America's recent and not so recent past. So after the Pearl Harbor attack in 1941, when the U.S. went to war, 97% of Americans approved. Later, when George W. Bush went to war and put troops in Afghanistan, 92% of Americans approved in the opening days of that conflict. You want to know what it is right now with the Iran war in its opening days? Remember, we're not even 2 weeks in, right? It is 41%. To flip that over, 6 out of 10 Americans disapprove of this war. It's true. Most Republicans are generally supportive of the war so far, but their support tends to waver if this war drags on. The consequences become more reverberating and more potentially drastic for the world and the global economy.